Ruling Turkey's powerhouse, the AK party's dominance is put to the test in Istanbul's rerun of its mayoral election. But what does that mean for the country's democracy and also for the president, Mr. Erdogan? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Peter Dobby. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has always been keenly aware that, politically speaking, what happens to Turkey's second city could have a major and lasting impact on his own political future. The city is crucially important as the nation's business hub, but it dealt a blow to the president's ruling Justice and Development AK party during the mayoral elections in March. The ruling AK party contested that result over counting irregularities, and Turkey's electoral board upheld the complaint. So Turkish voters went back to the polls, many saying they're concerned about unemployment and the rising cost of living. Mr. Erdogan's critics blame him for the economic recession, and the vote is seen as a referendum on his policies. Al Jazeera's Hashim Al-Halbara sets up our discussion today from Istanbul.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said many times that whoever wins Istanbul wins Turkey. The city was the starting point for AK Party's political rise and dominance in recent years. It was Erdogan's win of the mayorship of Istanbul in 1994 that catapulted him onto the national stage and helped launch AK Party, which has managed ever since to win general elections and secure comfortable leads. And this explains why when they lost the city in March, it came as a major setback for Erdogan, for the party and for his supporters. And although this is a local election, but the rerun could be a crucial moment for AK Party. If they lose, it could be an indication they are losing popular support or a need to reinvent themselves, or the public sentiment in Turkey is shifting towards supporting an alternative to AK Party. Hashim Al-Halbara for Inside Story.
OK, let's hear how some Turkish voters feel about this rerun.
This second election, I think, is going to solve most of the problems in social, political, and ethical area.
Everybody's opposed to the High Election Board's decision to rerun the Istanbul election. Nobody thought this was ordinary. Hopefully, this election will be held within the laws.
We are taking part in this election, but with qualms. This cannot be denied. It's a fact. We hope that irregularities will not happen in this election.
OK, let's get going. Let's introduce our panel today. From Istanbul, Mehmet Çelik, managing editor of the Daily Sabah newspaper. From London, Fadi Hakura, manager of the Turkey Project at Chatham House. And from Ankara, Yusuf Kanli, formerly the editor of the Hurriyet newspaper. Welcome to you all. Mehmet, in Istanbul, let's go back to March and start our discussion there. Those claims of irregularities, there was only 13,000 votes in it, but those claims, how was that received by the voters?
Well, I think there is two sides of the story. There's those voters who say that this small margin should be analyzed and the claim should be taken seriously, and the fact that the AK Party side took it to Supreme Election Council should be taken serious. The fact that there is more than 10 million voters in Istanbul, this small margin should be taken into consideration. But on the other hand, there is the opposition voter base who says that, you know, this small margin and the irregularities are seen as a you know, like an escape from the losing side. But at the end of the day, it is the Supreme Election Council who is eligible, who's able to make that decision whether or not the claims were you know, worthy of taken into consideration. And the fact that they were, you know, they decided to nullify the March 31st election by you know, 7 in favor of the AK Party poll, I think it's significant. I mean, this was a judicial process that AK Party had right to appeal to, and they did that. This is part of our election process and election laws. And you know, there is the tiredness from the elections by the voters at the same time. So, you know, there is two sides of the stories in this whole cancelling of the March 31st elections.
Fadi Hakura in London, what's the central message from the voters of Istanbul to Mr. Erdogan?
I think the voters in Istanbul are deeply unhappy with the deteriorating state of the economy. Food inflation is over 30%, unemployment is in double digits, the Turkish lira is plummeting against the US dollar and the euro. The debt burden, felt by the Turkish private sector and or consumer, is becoming increasingly unbearable. So the number one issue for the Istanbul voters is the state of the national economy. Also, we see now the majority, now over 50% of all Turkish bank deposits now are denominated in a foreign currency, which is an indication of growing impatience by the Turkish public over the state of the economy.
Yusuf Kanli in Ankara, if that growing impatience translates into the political sands are shifting underneath the AKP, does that mean that those same sands are shifting as well under the feet of President Erdogan?
Of course, we cannot say the results of Istanbul are irrelevant, or 15,000 difference between two contenders of the first round was irrelevant. One vote is enough to win or lose an election. That was what Mr. Erdogan or Mr. Binali Yıldırım said before the election. And indeed, that's the case. The Istanbul rerun is indeed eroding the confidence of the people in the system in the country, and is ruining the image of Turkey as a country capable of holding fair and just elections. That's one part. Two, of course, the outcome of the Istanbul election will be dominated mainly by the economic worries of the people.
Yusuf, can I just interrupt you and stop you there for a second, just for a second? That's not quite an answer to my question. My question was this: are we in effect seeing Mr. Erdogan not displaying the political dexterity that he has displayed since 1994, since he took Istanbul himself? Is he beginning to lose his political grip and people are reacting to that?
Of course, in a certain extent, he started in Istanbul, and this might be the beginning of the end of him. That's an expectation. However, in politics, you cannot be sure of anything, as every election is may go either way, particularly in a city like Istanbul. But hopefully, this will be the end of a totalitarian handling of the country.
Fadi Hakura in London. There are already existing fissures within the AK party. Could this rerun of the mayoral election make those fissures bigger, make them more acute, and therefore make them damaging for Mr. Erdogan?
I think that if I can just add one point to your previous speaker, when national leaders tend to stay too long in politics, normally over 10 years, they become increasingly centralize too much power in their hands. We saw that with Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom. We saw that with Helmut Kohl in Germany. So when national leaders, and now we see it with Angela Merkel in Germany again. So when leaders stay too long in power, they tend to become more inflexible and try to centralize as much power as possible.
And Mehmet in Istanbul, I guess that's a fair point. I mean, the voters of Istanbul are just tired, surely. They've had, what, 6 votes, not 5, 6 votes in 5 years. They're just exhausted when it comes to having to go and vote for somebody again.
Well, that is right. In fact, the rerun decision was not a decision that AK Party initially demanded. They demanded the recount of votes, but the CHP unfortunately stood against that, and then AK Party had to take their appeal to Supreme Election Council, and the decision was made by the Supreme Election Council. With regards to the previous points made, I think there is an exhaustion of the elections. There is that perception that Erdogan is taking a blow by losing, let's say, Ankara and some of the other big cities, and the fact that opposition has been able to consolidate its voter base against him in Istanbul. But we should not forget that it's been 17 years, nearly 2 decades of AK Party being in power and entering elections and winning every single one of them. In fact, they won, they received the most votes and they were the most popular, and people stood behind them by far in the past March 31st elections too. There is that, however, fatigue in AK Party, that AK Party has been able to renew itself in the past elections, and I think this election was one of them. And they have to take some of the points people try to make into consideration, and economy is one of them. Economy has to be getting better, and I think the fact that it is one of the indicators and one of the factors affecting people's decision, the government has to take that into consideration. And President Erdogan has said that they will focus on economy in the past, nearly 4.5 years of no election period. That's one of the first things he said right after the March 31st elections. But there is a rerun of decision that was made. This was not made by AK Party, nor did the AK Party demanded this. But there were irregularities that AK Party had appealed, and the decision was made by the Supreme Election Council.
Yusuf in Ankara,
however, disagree.
Just to stop you there, gentlemen, I just want to put that point to Yusuf Kanli in Ankara. Did people go for Mr. İmamoğlu in March? Granted, there was only 13,000 votes in it, but did they go for him because he had genuinely attractive, logical policies, or did they go for him because he wasn't the AKP?
Most of the people went to İmamoğlu because they saw in him the hope. People are thirsty of hope. Just the slogan of everything will be far better is indeed reflective of what İmamoğlu offered to Turks. People just were thirsty of a smooth running democracy rather than one-man show that Mr. Erdogan converted Turkey over the past 17 years.
Fadi in London, just to be clear, for those of us who are not totally across the tapestry of Turkish politics, Istanbul is the jewel in the political crown of Turkish politics. If you lose Istanbul, your prestige is dented, surely. So what's your direction of travel if you're the president, even if there is a distance between you as an AKP president and the party itself?
There's no doubt that Istanbul is extremely important in Turkish national politics, and President Erdogan's victory in Istanbul is a very important, or loss that is an important psychological has important psychological value. But I think that President Erdogan made a strategic error by exaggerating the importance of Istanbul. What is important in Turkey now is not Istanbul, but the state of the national economy. If the economy continues to deteriorate, his hold on power will get weaker and weaker. But if the economy improves, then his tenure in office will be solidified. So I think it was a strategic error on President Erdogan's part to exaggerate the importance of Istanbul rather than remaining laser focused on the economy.
But surely, Fadi, he's played a clever game with this particular election, not the election in March, this particular election. He's been very hands-off. He's been very standoffish. He hasn't been out there campaigning.
He has not. President Erdogan has decided this time around to take a more backseat role in the elections. But ultimately, for the voters of Istanbul, it's really a competition between President Erdogan and the CHP candidate, Republican People's Party candidate, Ekrem İmamoğlu. I think politics in Turkey is very personalized. Individuals are much more important than parties. The AKP is President Erdogan, and President Erdogan is the AKP. If he were to lose power, then I think, like in the past in previous parties, you'll see the AKP, I think, over time will disintegrate and disappear. So what matters is really President Erdogan who's on the ballot box rather than the official AKP candidate, Bin Ali Yildirim.
Mehmet, coming back to you in Istanbul, the opposition groupings, the smaller opposition groupings, have kind of reinvented themselves a little bit in as much as they've got behind the CHP. Can they stay there? Can they stay united and present? Can they coalesce around the CHP as a national opposition to Mr. Erdogan?
Well, right now, I think the opposition has consolidated its voter base around one thing, and that is being anti-Erdogan. And I don't think that the fact that they come from various ideological backgrounds, various social backgrounds, and they have different ultimate motives and goals in their political stances in Turkish politics. I think, you know, of course, everything is possible, but it is very difficult for a very conservative, let's say, Felicity Party to stand with, you know, CHP, or the fact that although they are not officially part of the alliance, but let's say the HDP, which receives a lot of votes from the, which receives mostly the votes from the Kurdish voters, it is very difficult for them to be in an alliance or supporting a candidate who also receives votes and support from a very nationalist, far-right good party. This was a strategic game they have been in, and the ultimate aim here is to eliminate Erdogan from the political arena in Turkey. Whether or not this is a long-term strategic alliance, I don't think that it will serve to the party's long-term interests. However, in the short term, they have been successful, and we can see that through Mr. İmamoğlu's votes, which was nearly 50%, and he was able to surpass Bin Ali Yildirim's votes. If this alliance wasn't there, I mean, we know the traditional voter base of CHP being around oddly 30% and AK Party has been close to 50% in the past few elections. So the fact that this alliance has brought them a result in the short term, I don't think we can say that this will stay like that unless they come to some sort of other ideological compromises made within their bases, or they come to a consensus on how they will go forward. Being an anti-Erdoganism is not enough for that, for them to stay together. I mean, there will be a lot in stake.
Pardon me for interrupting you there, Mehmet. Yusuf Canley in Ankara. Mr. İmamoğlu, in effect, during this campaign, surely tried to straddle two stools. He was almost simultaneously pitching himself as being a victor who wasn't given the victory, but he was also pushing himself as being a victim. Was that a canny political choice on his part, or do you think that long term that may backfire?
You know, in Turkish politics, being victim always paid off. And now, not only İmamoğlu, but the government is trying to play the role of victim as well. And I believe İmamoğlu is the real victim in this current case, and it will pay off. I expect personally between 4 to 6% difference between İmamoğlu and Bin Ali Yildirim in today's election, just because not only of that, but also on AK Party, while on the one hand playing rather dirty and accusing İmamoğlu of being a PKK candidate, itself engaging in a very dirty campaign of getting on board PKK's imprisoned chieftain Abdullah Öcalan in latest efforts. Therefore, as my friend from Sabah said, yes, indeed, it's very difficult for a ultra-nationalist group to stay in the same boat with a separatist terrorist. Therefore, the same problem that he mentioned about İmamoğlu exists for the government flank as well.
Can we, Mehmet, say now, given the strength of feeling, that Mr. Erdogan is safe for now, but, you know, events, dear boy, that's an expression about European politics. There may be something further down the line if this does not, once the dust has settled, if this doesn't play to his strengths, if it plays to his weaknesses? We're talking about the economy. And the AKP, also, Mehmet, they're taking ideas out of the CHP playbook. They're talking about literally bread and butter issues, lowering the cost of public transport in Istanbul. That's a vote winner, surely.
Well, you know what? I think Istanbul elections are very significant for either side's political future in Turkey. At the end of the day, we should not forget that this is also just a municipal election. However, if the government, if the opposition wins Istanbul and the government does not take that loss into consideration and answers the demands of the people when it comes to the economy or other demands they may have or they have, I think it is only normal for any government or any political party's power to erode and diminish in time if they fail to meet people's demands. But AK Party, and I'm only saying this looking at their past, if they're able to readjust themselves, if they're able to strengthen the economy, if they're able to play their diplomatic moves efficiently and successfully in international politics, and if they're able to somehow get back to their connection and their communication with the public, I think Istanbul election, that significance from Istanbul election will be diminished at the same time. Dexterity we talk about when it comes to Erdogan, Mr. Erdogan, and I think he's a political genius that we've seen for the many decades in Turkey. If he's able to make that shift, even if the Istanbul is lost, I think the political longevity of AK Party will still be there. However, if people do not see that readjustment and success, it's only normal for any political party or any government to not get the same support as the previous elections, and people will make that choice. Turkish voters are very aware and very educated when it comes to that.
OK. Fadi in London, clearly it's impossible to get into Mr. Erdogan's head, but once this chapter has been completely written, and we're viewing this through the prism of mayoral elections in Istanbul, does Mr. Erdogan need to tilt a little bit? Does he need to come out, not fighting, but come out visibly changing himself, changing the party and changing the country?
I think that assuming that the ruling party were to lose the elections in Istanbul, I think that President Erdogan should adopt a much more conciliatory approach to politics, rather than this very confrontational, robust, and in many ways ideological attitude to his opponents. But I suspect that President Erdogan will not adopt a conciliatory approach. I think he will double down on a very assertive and aggressive posture towards his opponents. I don't think that there's many easy fixes for the Turkish economy. Any changes are going to have to be structural, and that will not be easy for President Erdogan to undertake, and I doubt that they will be undertaken. So my expectation is that you will see President Erdogan continue with his current approach to politics, rather than taking the lessons and trying to reverse course to maintain his hold on power.
Gentlemen, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much for such an interesting conversation today here on Inside Story. Thanks to all our guests. They were Mehmet Çelik, Fadi Hakura and Yusuf Kanli, and thank you to you too for your company. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do check out our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also follow the conversation, keep it going on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story, and I am at Peter Dobby1. From me, Peter Dobby, and the entire team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. We'll do it all again tomorrow. Bye-bye.